America built the most expensive defense system in human history. Iran found a way to break it for $35,000. That number is not a typo. While the United States military deploys interceptor missiles that cost $12 million each, Iran has been flooding the battlefield with simple explosive drones that cost less than a used car. And the math of that exchange is not just embarrassing for Washington, it is strategically catastrophic. Because every time America fires a $12 million missile to destroy a $35,000 drone, Iran wins. Not on the battlefield, in the spreadsheet. And wars in the modern era are increasingly decided not by who fires the biggest weapon, but by who runs out of money first. Two completely different narratives are emerging from this conflict, and both cannot be true. Washington insists that its air defense systems are performing exactly as designed. Pentagon briefings have consistently highlighted interception rates, pointing to the large number of Iranian drones and missiles successfully shot down before reaching their targets. American officials argue that the system is working, that the investment is justified, that the technology gap between U.S. defense capabilities and Iranian offensive weapons remains overwhelming. Tehran is telling a very different story. Iranian military commanders are publicly framing every drone launch not as a military gamble, but as a calculated economic attack. Their strategy, according to regional analysts monitoring Iranian state communications, is not primarily to destroy targets. It is to force America to keep pulling $12 million missiles out of inventory to chase $35,000 machines. And Iran has far more drones than America has interceptors. Two governments, two completely different versions of what this war is actually about. And in the gap between those versions lies a question that Pentagon planners are reportedly struggling to answer behind closed doors. What happens when the interceptors run out? And how close is that moment to arriving? This strategy did not appear overnight. Iran has been quietly developing and refining its drone program for nearly 15 years. The program accelerated dramatically following the period of maximum economic pressure when international sanctions cut Iran off from conventional weapons markets. Unable to purchase advanced fighter jets, naval vessels, or sophisticated missile systems through normal channels, Iranian engineers turned their attention to what they could build cheaply and in enormous quantities. The result was a drone arsenal that Western defense analysts initially dismissed as unsophisticated. Early Iranian drones were slow, relatively easy to detect, and carried limited payloads. They did not look like serious military threats. Then everything changed. Successive generations of Iranian drone development incorporated lessons learned from every engagement. Captured U.S. military drones provided engineering insights. Conflict zones in Yemen, Syria, and Iraq became live testing environments. And the program that Western analysts once described as a minor irritant quietly evolved into one of the most cost-effective offensive weapons systems in the modern world. By the time this conflict began, Iran had reportedly stockpiled thousands of drones across multiple locations, dispersed, hidden, ready, and priced at a point where losing them in large numbers barely registers as an economic cost compared to what it forces the other side to spend in response. The numbers from the current conflict have forced a conversation inside the Pentagon that officials are not yet having publicly. According to defense analysts tracking the engagement data, U.S. and allied forces have fired hundreds of high-value interceptor missiles since the conflict began. Each intercept represents not just a military success, but a significant drawdown of finite and expensive inventory. Restocking those interceptors takes time. Manufacturing capacity has limits. And the supply chains that produce these weapons were not designed to sustain this pace of consumption indefinitely. Iran is aware of precisely this calculation. Regional intelligence sources suggest that Iranian commanders are deliberately launching drones in waves specifically designed to exhaust interceptor supplies faster than they can be replenished. Not every drone needs to reach its target. The mission is attrition, systematic, patient, mathematically ruthless. But Washington is presenting a very different account of the battlefield economics. American officials argue that the cost exchange, while unfavorable on a per-unit basis, ignores the broader picture. The infrastructure Iran is defending, the officials argue, is worth far more than any individual drone. And the political cost to Tehran of allowing its targets to be destroyed outweighs the financial cost to Washington of intercepting them. What we know so far is this. Both sides are spending at rates that cannot continue indefinitely. Iran's drone production lines are reportedly running at full capacity. And sources close to the U.S. defense establishment suggest that certain interceptor categories are already being rationed in ways that have not been publicly disclosed. The financial dimension of this conflict extends far beyond the battlefield exchange rates. Every $12 million interceptor missile that leaves inventory used to eventually be replaced. That replacement cost flows directly into defense budgets that are already under pressure from competing priorities. Congressional appropriations committees are reportedly receiving classified briefings on inventory depletion rates that have not been shared with the public. And defense contractors are being quietly approached about accelerating production timelines that were never designed for wartime consumption levels. The consequences will not remain confined to military budgets. Defense spending at this scale redirects resources from other national priorities. It adds pressure to fiscal positions that several allied nations were already managing carefully. And it creates a dependency on defense industrial capacity that takes years to build and cannot be conjured quickly regardless of how much money is allocated. Meanwhile, Iran's drone production costs remain stubbornly, almost insultingly low. Regional analysts estimate that Iran can produce multiple drones for the cost of a single component in the interceptors being used against them. That asymmetry, sustained over months of conflict, begins to reshape the economic geography of the war in ways that pure military analysis consistently underestimates. The battlefield is where weapons are fired, but the war is increasingly being fought in budget offices, factory floors, and supply chains that stretch across continents. Inside Washington, the drone cost problem has collided with a political reality that nobody in the administration wants to discuss openly. The United States defense industrial base was built for a different era. It was optimized for producing small numbers of extremely sophisticated and extraordinarily expensive weapons systems. It was not designed for the kind of high-volume attrition warfare that Iran's drone strategy is forcing upon it. And retooling that industrial base, even with unlimited funding, is a process measured in years rather than months. Netanyahu has been watching this dynamic with particular concern. Israel's own interceptor stocks have faced similar pressure throughout this conflict. The Iron Dome and David Sling systems, while technically impressive, operate on the same fundamental economic logic: expensive interceptors chasing cheap attackers. And Israel's manufacturing capacity is a fraction of America's. The sustainability questions that American planners are discussing privately are ones that Israeli defense officials are confronting with considerably more urgency. Reports emerging from closed-door consultations between Washington and Jerusalem suggest that the conversations about interceptor sustainability have been difficult. Both sides understand the problem. Neither side has a solution that works within the time frames the conflict is imposing. And the longer this continues, the more the economic pressure reshapes the military options available to both governments. The implications of Iran's drone strategy extend far beyond this specific conflict, and both Russia and China have been paying extremely close attention. Russian military planners have reportedly been studying every engagement of this conflict with particular focus on the cost exchange ratios between Iranian drones and American interceptors. The lessons being drawn in Moscow are directly applicable to potential future confrontations in European theaters, where NATO would face similar economic attrition mathematics on a vastly larger scale. China's interest is arguably even more strategically significant. Chinese defense analysts have publicly noted that the drone cost asymmetry demonstrated in this conflict validates investment strategies that Beijing has been pursuing for over a decade. Massive production of relatively simple but effective drone systems designed specifically to exhaust expensive American and allied interceptor Inventories represents a model that China has the industrial capacity to execute at a scale Iran cannot approach. Meanwhile, across allied governments in Europe and the Indo-Pacific, defense ministries are quietly reassessing procurement strategies that were finalized before this conflict began. Several NATO members are reportedly accelerating programs to develop lower-cost interceptor alternatives. But those programs exist on development timelines measured in years, and the conflict is happening now. Intelligence analysts suggest that Iran's success in demonstrating the economic viability of drone attrition warfare has already influenced weapons procurement decisions in at least 6 countries that have not publicly commented on the conflict at all. The $35,000 drone has changed something permanent about how wars will be fought and funded. The mathematics of this conflict were always going to force a moment of reckoning. America built its defense around the assumption that technological superiority would always outweigh numerical advantage. Iran built its strategy around the assumption that economic attrition could neutralize technological superiority. And the conflict now unfolding is determining which assumption was correct. The interceptors are being counted. The drones keep coming. And somewhere in the gap between those two realities, the future of modern warfare is being written in real time. The question now is not whether America's defense economics are sustainable. The question is how much longer before that answer becomes impossible to hide. And when it does, the world will not be ready for what comes next.